Hey everyone, and welcome. We're going to dive into a massive part of our economy, something you probably interact with every single day, maybe without even realizing it. We are talking about public enterprises. What happens when the government decides to step out of parliament and right into the CEO's chair? So let me just ask you this. What do your national railway, the post office, and maybe your local power company, what do they all have in common? Well, chances are they're all public enterprises. Yep, they're businesses run by the government. All right, so here's the game plan for this explainer. We're going to kick things off by defining what a public enterprise even is. Then we'll get into why governments do this in the first place. After that, we'll explore the three main ways they're set up, look at the good versus the bad, and finally check out what the future holds for them. Okay, first things first, what exactly is a public enterprise? Let's nail down a solid definition so we're all on the same page. Now, the two most important words here are commercial and marketed. This isn't just a government agency giving away a service for free. Oh no, a public enterprise is a real business. It makes stuff or provides a service, and it actually sells that output to customers, just like any other company. So what's the secret sauce here? Well, for starters, the government owns and runs the show, and they put up the initial cash. But here's the real kicker. They're not just chasing profits. Their decisions are driven by public policy. That means they're ultimately accountable to us, the public, through our elected officials. And as we're about to see, they come in a few different shapes and sizes. And this right here, this slide is where it all clicks. Look at the motive. A private company. It exists to make money for its owners, plain and simple. But a public enterprise? Its whole reason for being is to serve the public interest and social welfare. That one single difference completely changes the game, from what they're trying to achieve to who they have to answer to at the end of the day. Which, of course, brings us to the big question. Why? Why on earth would a government get into the messy business of running a company instead of just letting the private sector handle it? Let's dig into the mission behind the market. This quote really gets to the heart of it all. It's about using the engine of business to achieve these bigger social goals, things that a company focused only on the bottom line would probably never even consider. So what do these goals look like in the real world? Well, think about building a massive dam or a railway line to a really remote area. A private company might look at the numbers and say, no way, not profitable. But a public enterprise can do it because the goal isn't profit. It's about developing that region. They also work to keep powerful monopolies in check and to be a model employer, setting a high standard for things like wages and working conditions. Now, it's super important to know that not all public enterprises are created equal. The government basically has a blueprint with three different flavors, and each one has its own unique mix of government control versus business-like freedom. As you can see here, the three main structures are the departmental organization, the public corporation, and the government company. So let's break down what each of these actually looks like in practice. First up, we've got the oldest and most traditional model, the departmental organization. The easiest way to think about this is to imagine a business that's literally just another department inside a government ministry. It's like a room inside the main government house. Think of things like the Postal Service or national railways in many countries. The huge pro here is control. The government has total direct control. But, and this is a big but, the downside is it gets tangled up in all the usual government bureaucracy and red tape. It's slow, it's inflexible, and it's not exactly built for the fast-paced world of business. Okay, our second flavor is the public corporation. You might also hear it called a statutory corporation. So if the last one was a room in the house, this is more like a purpose-built workshop out in the backyard. It's created by a special law passed by Parliament, which means it's its own separate legal entity, but it's still 100% owned by the government. So the whole idea here was to get the best of both worlds. Government accountability, but with the freedom to operate more like a business. The problem is that freedom, or autonomy, is often just on paper. In reality, politicians can still interfere. Plus, if you ever want to change its fundamental purpose, you have to go back and pass a whole new law, which is a massive headache. And that brings us to our third and, honestly, most common flavor today, the government company. Picture a totally normal company, one that's registered just like any private business. The only difference? The government is the majority shareholder. It owns at least 51% of the stock. This structure is by far the most flexible, it's easy to set up, and it can even bring in private investors to own up to 49% of the company. But the main criticism is that because it doesn't need a special act of parliament to be created, it can sometimes feel like it's dodging direct public accountability. This table really pulls it all together perfectly. Just look across the rows. As you move from left to right, from departmental to government company, you can see a really clear pattern. You're trading direct government control for more and more business-like autonomy and flexibility. Okay, so we've covered the what and the how. But the big question remains, have they actually worked? Time for a little reality check on their performance. Looking at the positives, their contributions have been absolutely massive, especially in developing countries. I mean, these enterprises were the engines of industrialization. They built the steel plants, the power grids, the heavy machinery factories, all the foundational stuff that private companies were too risk-averse to touch. They literally built the backbone of modern infrastructure. And we're not talking about a small niche sector here. The scale is just immense. To give you an idea, in India alone, as of 2018, there were 320 of these enterprises at the central government level. That's a huge economic force. But this is where the story gets a bit more complicated. As this chart shows, while a lot of these companies do make a profit, a pretty significant number are consistently losing money. Now, that's not always a sign of failure. Sometimes they're supposed to lose money because they're providing a vital service at a low cost. But this financial strain is exactly what has forced a major rethink of their role. And that brings us to the future. It's a future that's getting shaped by a changing role, and one key policy you need to know about, disinvestment. So what exactly is disinvestment? Well, to put it simply, it's the government selling its shares in a public enterprise. It's the complete opposite of nationalization, where the government takes over a private company. Here, they're stepping back. But the policy is a bit more nuanced than just sell everything. For the most part, the government wants to keep majority control, that 51%, while selling off smaller chunks to the public. However, for certain companies, they're open to what's called strategic disinvestment, which means selling off a majority stake and handing over management control, hoping to bring in that private sector efficiency. And that really leaves us with the million-dollar question that governments all over the world are wrestling with. What is the right balance? How do you protect the public good while also bringing in private efficiency? There is no easy answer, and that debate is going to define our economies for a long, long time. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.